So the Mughal did rule a large part of India, but much of northwestern India, so modern-day Rajasthan, was under Hindu rule. These are called, they're like a bunch of small kingdoms, series of small kingdoms called the Hindu Rajput, and at least they're ruled by these groups for a time. By 1615, these small kingdoms submitted to the Mughal emperors, but they maintained a degree of independence. But still, of course, they had to pay tribute to the Mughal rulers until the fall of the empire in 1857. Rajput painting is stylistically similar to Mughal and Persian painting in format and material, but it lacks the self-portraits and the portraits seen in some Mughal painters' art. Instead here, we don't see self-portraits because artists are mostly anonymous, so they're not participating within the narrative of their painting. Also, we don't see as many portraits as we did with like Akbar, where we saw his portrait. We don't see that as much either. The most innovative examples of Hindu art from the late period are painted illustrations with nude types of Hindu texts written in the vernacular. So that's the language of like the lay people. In the past, these texts were only written in Sanskrit. Only a small group of priests and nobles of the Brahmin caste could read these in Sanskrit. Once the vernacular texts become available, even illiterate people can sit around and listen to someone who does know how to read and can listen to stories in the language that they understood. These texts become very popular. They often describe the romance of the gods and the humans. These make for very interesting stories, but also they have important Hindu messages about the bonding of the human soul with the gods through love. Two of Hinduism's favorite lovers during this period were Krishna, who is a manifestation of Vishnu as the herdsman or warrior, and Radha. Radha is a lover of Krishna and serves as a metaphor for the soul. Her existence and her longing for Krishna is symbolic for the longing for the divine. So this is all about that message of the human soul with the God, bonding the human soul with the gods through love. One of the most popular subjects of Rajput painting was Radha and Krishna in the grove. And this is the example I have for you here. You have a different one in your book, but kind of same theme going on. This example was painted in Kangra in the Punjab hills. It is a small painting. It's only about 5 inches, a little over 5 inches by almost 7 inches. And it shows Krishna and Radha sitting in a beautiful landscape, which is a forest grove. And this is often featured in their stories. The grove landscape was stylistically influenced by Persian and Western art. Now, when you look at the image, it seems kind of flat. There seems like a lack of depth or perspective, and the figures in the middle ground seem out of proportion with the rest of the elements. Like this looks like a understandable landscape, and then these guys seem too big for this composition. This is fitting for the local Rajput styles, where they wanted things to be not looking like reality. They don't want it to be naturalism, because what they're trying to do is create a sense of fantasy. The artist is trying to convey that this is not the real world. This is not the natural world. Instead, this is this fantasy world of the gods and this interaction. And they're trying to kind of pull on poetry and relate the image to poetry in that way. The saturated colors that we see in this image they're also local elements that we would have seen in past Indian painting as well. The composition is beautifully framed by trees. We can see that there's a vine going up this tree, and it's kind of entangling itself in one of the trees as if to mimic the embrace of the lovers. And you can see the lovers here kind of entangling themselves with each other. And this is depicting the force and the flow of passion. The elements of the background are references to both Hindi and Sanskrit poetry. The lotus plants that you see here in the river sort of dance in and out of the current of the stream. Lotus plants have a very long history, a long symbolic history in India particularly, and they're symbolic of purity and beauty. The flowering trees that you see, here's one here, are also symbolic. Their spear-shaped branches are laden with flowers, and the way that they're treated as poetic parallels for the love between Krishna and Radha. The plantains that they're sitting on, and then there's some back here as well, are symbolic of absent lovers. In some versions of the Radha Krishna story, she's actually a married woman, and she's engaging in this affair with Krishna, who she desperately loves. The large leaves are also used as a romantic symbol for women's smooth thighs, kind of insinuating sex. This seems to be further emphasized by Radha's thighs beneath the drapery. You can see the shapes kind of mimic each other. The curving outlines of her thighs are paralleled by these plantain leaves, adding to the eroticism of the image. The texture of Radha's hair is mimicked in the ripples of the water, while the edge of her dress has the same kind of scalloped curves, you look real closely there, which would appear in the leaves of the lotuses. The birds that we see in the image may represent life, or they could have a specific meaning. We're not sure. These specific references to poetry is about these artists trying to translate poetry into painting. They're trying to visualize poetry and the feelings and concepts that it conveys. So it's not just a story. They're not just telling us this narrative. Instead, they're trying to create a feeling. They're conveying all these things at once. So they are telling a story, but they're conveying a feeling. They're conveying a lesson. And they're also trying to connect you to the divine. So it's a very loaded image, and their goals are very, very loaded as well. But it's not just a simple kind of intellectual image. You're meant to have this emotional involvement. Colonial India. In 1805, mountaineers from Nepal attack the Raja kingdom. The Raja asks the British for help. The British East India Company had been gaining power in India since the 17th century. And basically, they kind of laid the foundation for British rule in India. And the British will end up ruling India from 1858 to 1947. The East India Company ruled a large part of the subcontinent after defeating the ruler of Bengal in 1757. In 1857, there's a rebellion, and the East India Company was relieved of their control. At this time, Great Britain puts a viceroy of the crown in charge of their holdings in India. Then in 1877, Queen Victoria gains the titles of Empress of India. This causes drastic changes and the melding of styles and artworks. Art is used in India by the English as a way to anglicize and westernize India. So it really becomes this propagandistic tool. In the late 19th century, British artists and patrons in India had a preference for portraiture and history paintings. Indian artists and patrons had varied response to art for foreign rulers. As a result, traditional, Western, and hybrid Eastern-Western art appear in India. Artists faced difficult decisions in the face of these patrons who wanted Westernized art. Westernized art schools were established as the part of the British effort to spread British culture and values, and as they put it, quote-unquote, improve Indian tastes. Artists were trained on Western forms, perspectives, and mediums, like oil paint, while architects were also trained in the neoclassic style, which was popular at the time. One artist that rose to great prominence by being a European-style artist and entrepreneur was Raja Ravi Varma. He comes from a princely farm family, and that's why they called him Raja. He was trained by his uncle. His early style reflects more local traditions, but his later work follows more formal Western traditions. He does often use Indian subject matter, though. He creates romanticized history paintings based on the Sanskrit classics. Here we can see the Western influences on his work. As you can see, this is an image that we've already studied in this course. This is Joshua Reynolds, Lady Sarah Bunbury sacrificing to the Graces, and we call this style the Grand Manner. And remember, he's from England. And then over here we have Ravi Varma's image. I would definitely call Ravi Varma's image, work style a little bit more romanticism than neoclassicism, but as with many paintings of these styles, his work really combines several characteristics from these styles. He uses bright colors, which is more authentic or more native of the Indian style. He also uses chiaroscuro. He uses dramatic poses and dramatic subject matter. Some art historians call his images examples of this Reynolds-like Grand Manner style, and I think we can definitely see why in these two comparisons of these images. Now, he paints images like these initially for Western patrons, but he is the first major Indian artist to use inexpensive printing techniques, and he's able to reproduce his images of Hindu deities and legends, and they start to become really popular in India. This is Ravi Varma's The Triumph of Indrajit from 1903. We can definitely see the European influences on his grand figures, particularly the woman over here in the corner. She looks like she comes out of a neoclassic or romantic painting. Here he depicts an episode from the Indian epic, the Ramayana. One of the criticisms of his work is, kind of like we saw in the image of Krishna and Radha. The thing that he's doing was the same thing they were trying to do, is they are undertaking the task of translating poetry, which consists of the limitless imagination and description, into art. Due to his Western style, he loses the sense of fantasy and imagination that really we saw with the Radha and Krishna, where that was kind of felt very otherworldly. This feels like it could be an event happening here in this location. The scene kind of looks real. The naturalism removes some of the elements of the supernatural. So when you look at this, you might not know that it's an epic about gods. Instead, you might just think it's some narrative about people. But the Ramayana is an epic poem about Rama, who is a divine prince, and his quest to rescue his consort, Sita, from the demon king Ravana. This episode is about Indrajit, who is the son of Ravana, and is the villain of the story. Or Ravana is the villain of the story, and Indrajit is the perfect warrior. Rama, who's like the hero of this, he is an avatar of Vishnu. And if you're not familiar with kind of some of the basics of Hindu religion, you might want to go back and look at that Hindu crash course video that I have. So Indrajit's father duels the god Indra, and he loses. And then Indrajit duels Indra, and he wins. But Brahma, who's another god, intervenes and asks Indrajit to release Indra in exchange for a boon. And a boon is like a wish, kind of, sort of. Indrajit asks to become invincible in any battle. Brahma grants this, but there's a catch. Indrajit has to perform a ritual sacrifice to a goddess before each battle. Eventually Rama, the hero, finds out about the catch and uses it to defeat him. Indrajit begs his father to release Sita. His father refuses. This isn't really a narrative image. You can't really tell the story specifically by looking at it. Instead, you kind of have to have knowledge of the story to sort of pick out the characters. We do see some key characters like Sita, but the rest of the narrative is rather unclear. And maybe this is kind of going with his sort of otherworldly fantasy attempts depicting in poetry. Ravi Varma builds the bridge between Indian and European traditions and creates a new popular image of the modern Indian artist. When he dies, he's the embodiment of colonial Indian art, and he's a national hero. But today, he's more controversial. They see him as kind of selling out. and embracing this Western identity instead of an Indian identity.